hurt us really here at all. All right. So what's up, everyone? We're now live Zoom. All my LinkedIn friends, what's up, my LinkedIn friends? For all of you who've been joining us over the past few sessions, big thank you. I think the topic for today is super interesting, everyone. It's around the pitch, right? And I know that this is something that you're very passionate about. I've got my own opinions on it. And so, you know, what I thought would be good for us to talk about today is, you know, before and after, or do you think that this is going to change things? And we can, you know, I want to dive into that later.
Yeah, sure.
I really hope so. I really feel like, you know, what the issue that I've seen is that we've really got into this mindset of just like mindless demoing, you know, and when we had Challenger Sale, which was supposed to teach us how to, you know, challenge our buyers, and, you know, really only a certain level of, you know, seller really ever got good at it, candidly, at least in my opinion. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about your background, man. Yeah. You know, a little about your background. How'd you get into this like pitch game, and, you know, like how did you gravitate? Because your background's super interesting for someone who's, you know, now talking about the pitch and everything.
Well, so first of all, Jake, thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan of yours. I discovered your work last year as I moved into this whole new sector that I'm in. I'm a big fan. So keep doing what you're doing. It's helping people, specifically the practical ways that you're offering advice. And for those that maybe don't know you, the folks that maybe have come over from my world and discovered you now through this interview today, it's the practical lessons. And in the military, which is where we'll take the bio, which is your question, how does all that weave into this? Well, in the military, we had this term called, or this phrase, techniques, tips, and procedures, TTP, meaning that, sure, somebody went ahead of you and did it, and they did it right, or maybe they messed something up. So what can you learn from them? And so that's what I've always been. So West Point, I was an aerospace engineer, and that really is where the journey of the pitch started. So as part of being a leader, and if you think of it in terms of sales and being able to communicate, it's all wrapped together. So sales, leadership, and communication.
Sales, leadership, communication. All right, got it.
They're all intertwined. You can't really have one without another, because if you have a great product but nobody's buying it, then it's obvious. So, but back to your question. So I was a senior at West Point, aerospace engineer. I was going to a conference at MIT where we were going to do pitch competitions for our ideas. There were three categories. There was content, technical merit, if you will, originality, and presentation. Now, I wasn't even going to be able to compete with Rensselaer and Cornell and MIT in the category of originality or content, but I did enter into the pitch competition in terms of just presenting ideas. Well, West Point walked away with first place, second place, and third place, because all during our college experience, we were always on, if you will. So we were always, it was either reciting knowledge, it was reciting what was going on, it was part of the military experience. We would go to the blackboards in math class and all of our classes and present our ideas. So long before I ever got to my first pitch, developing those communication skills, that's like the first thing. So then, you know, to kind of take a long story short, so 20 years in the Army, inside of that, a couple of trips to Iraq, both at the tactical level or the strategic level of the Army, like Pentagon stuff, all the way to the tactical level, like boots on the ground in Iraq. But again, during that whole time, it's about big presentations. It's about communicating ideas and vision, which again was all just practice for me for the business sector, which is what I did after those 20 years. Craig Cummings and I co-founded a company, partly based in DC, partly based here in Austin, that was focused on the commute. And this was, you know, before Lyft, this before Uber was very popular. People didn't understand this transformation technology that was coming. We saw it coming, but the point was we had to present the idea. We had to share that vision, and that's what allows us to raise money. So as a first-time entrepreneur, raised $2.8 million for my company, one pitch at a time, trying to communicate with people. So whether it's a customer that you're getting them to come along and be a loyal customer, or to part with their money and invest in your company that way, or you're raising money for your company, it's still a pitch. It's still an idea of inspiring, getting people to buy into what you're doing, literally and figuratively. Then I got in, you know, Mercedes comes along and buys my company, because in 2014, Uber and Lyft are driving everybody in the, you know, in the automobile industry crazy. They didn't know what to do. So they wanted some technology. They were already doing some amazing things in shared mobility, mobility as a service. And so they wanted to stay ahead of it. So that gave me a chance to go into the public service area. I ran for Congress, which was a constant pitch. Every day was a pitch. Pitch for voters, pitch for volunteers, pitch for donors. And through all those experiences in the military, in business, and then running for public office, I've learned and honed those skills. At the end of our campaign, we raised $3.1 million. And the harder part was it was done in chunks of money, less than $2,700 at a time. So that's weaving the story of how the pitch came and my biography on one. Let's take it anywhere you and your viewers want.
Dude, I love it, man. No, that's great, man. Let's, so you talk about, and each of these is a little bit different type, but there's a lot of similarities. One of the questions we just got on LinkedIn that I think's really helpful, and everyone, so do us a favor here, start to drop, these are true Q&As. What I enjoy the most is, how can we add maximum value here? How can we get you all, kind of being selfish, asking the right questions? I'll kind of take it to where I think is going to be helpful. On both of these, just drop your role, drop your role in the comments too. So we know we got salespeople here, we got CEOs. So just kind of let me know kind of what type of audience we have here. But his question, so this is from, what's up, Reza? So he said, there's a guy named Keenan. He's got a book called Gap Selling. And one of the things he says is about like dropping the sales script. Right. And I think that this is interesting, right? When we talk about the script or we talk about the pitch, what are your thoughts on this? Because again, you're talking about different, you're talking about much different elements where you've got to be focused in. You're talking to a VC or an angel investor or somebody. You're talking about donors. You're talking about sales. You're talking about being a CEO, et cetera. So what role do you think a script plays in the pitch? Like, what role do you feel like, that level of messaging and that level of, like duty plays in the pitch?
Yeah. So first of all, when it comes to the script, I want to differentiate that in a huge way from the pitch. So the pitch is what I mean, whether you're in the room with potential customers, you're in the room with donors, you're in the room with VC, and that's being in the moment. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to love what you're working on, because if it comes off sounding like a script, it's not going to go anywhere. That's right. The first thing I'll say. Second thing to that point is, if it's a script, then how the hell did you tailor it to that audience? And if you're not tailoring what you're saying to who you're talking to, you're going to go right over their head and lose them as soon as it sounds like a scripted pitch.
That's right.
And that'd be the biggest differentiation, I would say. But you got to know your product. You got to know what you're selling. One of my favorite stories in that is Craig and I, we were trying to get some developmental money from the state of Maryland early in their days of looking at mobility as a service and how we could help. And the night before, I don't live in Baltimore. I'm not from Baltimore, but I became as much of an expert as I can prior to getting there, down to and including knowing how many parking spots there were owned and operated by the city of Baltimore before that pitch. That's the level of understanding to meet your audience where they are. Otherwise, it's going to be a script and they're going to hear right through it. Literally.
Yeah. Do you feel like, and let's go into this, because I've got no problem with a very detailed outline. Maybe that's a way to put it. That, look, when you guys went in for your VC pitch, like you said, you prepared and you put together a script for that conversation. Yeah. Now, you had some decision trees, whether it was mental or actual, but you still had a play, right? You had we're going to do this section and maybe a question, so I don't lead the witness here. What happened when they asked you, what do you do? And so I think this is for everyone out there. If you're in sales, you're a CEO, it doesn't really matter. What happens when they start to ask you questions about slide 8 in slide 1 or 2, right? Inevitably this happens, right? You go into the first part of your talk, your conversation, you get random questions about slide 9, 10. How do you handle that?
Okay,
how do you think about that?
First of all, this goes back to Malcolm Gladwell's theory from the outliers of the 10,000 hours, meaning that you have to have done or been a part of what you're doing so much that when they try to throw you off and go to slide 9, well, go where they want to go. I'm usually more of a fan of allowing my audience or allowing the person I'm talking to just take it where they want to go. If they want to go more into the numbers, let's go to the numbers. They want to talk about the environmental impact, let's go there. So you just have to know your material and be comfortable in it. Which means you can't fake it. And whatever you do, if they take you into questions you don't know the answer to, tell them, You know
That's
what?
right.
Great question. Haven't thought about it. I'm going to write it down, because just like soldiers in the Army can, have a BS sniffer and they can sniff it out, so can customers, so can investors. You can fool them once or twice, but you're not going to fool them enough to be able to be consistent. You don't want to. You want to.
That's it, man. And I think that you're just starting to hit on it. I think this is a perfect place for us to talk, to sit for a little bit. That people get, and I see this a lot. You probably saw this with junior officer. You probably saw this with that. I see people that get by with being good bullshitters. And the problem is you always get smoked as you go upstream. Those are the people that then they get in that meeting, and when their main skill was not preparing, not scripted at all, and they could wing it, it works in micro settings.
Yep.
But when you get those big meetings, you get that big job interview, you get that big promotion opportunity, you get in that big meeting with a Fortune 500, these people get their ass whooped. And I know, because I was that kid, back when I was, and that's what it took, when I made the move to enterprise sales, for example. Look, I grew up in telemarketing, so I could quickly drive people to decisions and smaller, deals. And then as I started to observe these enterprise sellers, like, man, they're having a completely different conversation. Yep. Like their level of prep. And I learned that. I learned that preparation became my kind of sales superpower. But and I'll tell a story. And if you follow me, you've heard this story or a version of it. I joined a company called Career Builder back in 2006. I'd been a successful salesperson. And going through my training class, I was the second to last person. I hadn't sold anything. It had been a month and a half. And I'm like, man, here I am. I thought I was God's gift to sales and that I'm the best, salesperson on the planet. And what happened, and so I'm like, I didn't know what was happening. I go to our director. So my boss's boss at the time. I said, look, I don't know what's going on. And Evan had taken the time to listen into one of my calls. He said, Jake, why aren't you following the script? It's like, the script. Script. I am Jake Dunlap. I don't need scripts.
We don't need those thinking scripts.
I can wing it. And he goes, Jake, let me ask you a question. So this is for all my script haters out there, right? And I'll tell you kind of, and this goes back to that 10,000 hours. I'm going to bring it together. This is my experience, right? He said, Jake, let me ask you a question. Do you think we train 1,000 people on this script because we're stupid? He was like, do you think we developed this talk track because we don't know what we're doing? And I was like, well, no, you're probably not stupid. And, and I was like, it was a massive epiphany for me. I mean, the light bulb just flew on. I was like, okay. So I literally, the first few, and I'm sure when you were back pitching, I'm sure your first few meetings were just probably not some of your best meetings, or sometimes
they were horrible.
They're super authentic. But so I did it. I was the robot. I'm like, okay, look, what I'm doing wasn't working. Okay. So tell me about your 2 or 3 responsibility. And it was horrible, but but I got the gist. What I started to realize, wow, these questions are helping. This is, people are coming on board. So,
well, I think it's fair for Keenan's question to go back and point out that you just nailed it, Jake. What I was distinguishing between, I'm not talking about reading it. I'm talking about knowing your craft, and that script is what your boss gave you till you knew it well enough that you could follow the customer where they wanted to go.
That's it, man. And so it just made me, it was my first epiphany that sales is that there's a science to the pitch. There's a science there. There was a very specific reason that they had the order of operations of questions. And what I would see is, and that's where, I think it's kind of a mix. With the discovery process in particular, what I've seen is that if you don't follow a certain order of operations, and what I mean by that is if you get too tactical too quick, it becomes very difficult to anchor what you do to something more strategic. And so in the discovery process, I'm a big fan of saying, you talk about the role, you understand their big goals, and then you get into the tactics of what they're doing today. And I see if you let that tactics, as opposed to saying, you know what, Joseph, that's a great question. We're going to cover that in 20 minutes. And then you kind of go back to your line of questioning. But in the pitch, I've been on, the pitch, or when you talk about it, that's where you match it to the things that you heard. So I hope that story,
you bring up a great point. And I hope every one of your viewers or anybody reads from cover to cover, either the old version or updated versions of how to win friends and influence people. It's still one of the best examples of how to position your brain for these meetings with these folks. I'm a huge fan of it.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the pitch. right? So when you think about putting together the perfect pitch or whatever it is, so but I think that this is critical. I'm going to put a nail on this one because maybe we didn't nail it enough. Look, there is nothing wrong with writing a script, and I would argue that every single person should start with a script. Yep. If I had to pick a middle case customer, what's the exact order of operations? How would I talk about it? How would I think about it? There is nothing wrong with using a script. And the reason that and I think the other thing, and why I get scared, and I like Keenan a lot, but why I get scared whenever people like overly listen to this advice is the reason the script sucks is you haven't beat it to death. When you beat the script to death, and that's what you were just, bringing up, Joseph, it's practice, it's repetition. The script doesn't suck. You suck at delivering it, Correct. And I don't think enough people really fully understand that, and so that's my big thing around scripting. Like you gotta have it, man. You gotta have something.
You also said something in there that it's worth highlighting, because if you let's start with the script or the outline, the very detailed outline.
Yeah.
Especially if you only have a certain amount of time, certain amount of attention of the audience, you do have certain points you want to hit, and you want to practice hitting them quickly and getting to the point. I mean, it's why they call it an elevator pitch, because you need to be able to do it in the time it takes you to get from the top floor to the bottom floor, right, if that's all the time you have.
That's right. And so let's talk a little bit about the pitch. So tell me a little bit more about, like what are the key elements of a good pitch? Like what goes into it? What have you seen? What are the universal things you've seen?
For me, when it all flipped, when it started to change and it went from me trying to convince the person, whatever I was doing, that I had this great idea, or we built this thing that you got to have, when I flipped it and made it so that it was about them and about their world. And one of the best examples that I can give of that was a friend of mine who is an entrepreneur in a company selling empty seats on private jets that were flying all around Texas. Okay, sounds like a great idea, but that's not what he was selling in his pitch. What he was selling in his pitch was a seat at the breakfast table and at the dinner table with your kids. When I heard that, I was like, boom, because what he was saying was, look, you can get to the airport with no security or not long security lines, take a point-to-point jet, get to that meeting you need to in Midland or El Paso or Tulsa, and then get back for dinner that night. Boom. That was genius. So that's the first element, which is to make sure that your audience is the center of what you're talking about. Yeah. And then secondly, to that point, you need to make sure that that story that you're telling, however it is that you're allowing them to visualize them either using their product or investing in you or your company or making their own situation better, you really got to tell that story so they can visualize it. Nested inside that, of course, is that tailored audience. So in the early days of Ride Scout, when we were talking about a mobility tool to be able to connect all the world's ground transportation, if I was going to a group that was a little more environmental focused, my numbers and my discussion was about reduction of emissions, reduction in oil. But then if it was all about efficiencies and I was talking to other groups and it was about less hours stuck in traffic, more hours, more butts and seats, if you will, at work, that's the second element to it. But then the third is, I really do think beyond, the storytelling, putting the audience in the center, you have to have a sincere belief in what you're doing. I mean,
that's it, man. That's it.
Some things are not as sexy to sell as others, but there's something in everything. And I remember weeks ago, I remember you talking about office chairs and selling office chairs. Yeah. And I think that's the other neat thing, because if you are genuinely excited about it, if you do care about what you're trying to do or why you're selling that product, it's going to show. And then hopefully that'll help add to it. So those are the first three things I'll say, but we can take it in any direction you want.
Look, I love all those. I mean, we can just kind of break down this, let's say like one by one.
Yeah.
Are out of those elements within the pitch, are there any that you feel like have the maximum impact? What do you feel is like, if you're telling someone and they're new to sales or, they're trying to change up their craft, what is the one part of what you just mentioned that you think is most critical?
It's the storytelling. Okay. It's the storytelling, period, flat out. If you can help somebody believe that, ironically, I just watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles last night. I guess maybe to do my homework for this because, was it Dell?
But who am I? Am I John Candy? Like, which one am I? Am I one of the
think you're a perfect blend of both of them. Perfect blend of both. But no kidding, in that, when he was, doing the shower ring curtains and he was trying to make cash and he had the 3 teenagers lined up and he says, makes you look older, almost like you're 17. Those 3 girls were instantly in another place where they saw themselves in a story, older, being something that they weren't, and they were willing to buy a shower curtain ring to look older. So I'd say that's the most important element. Therefore, you have to do your homework to know what that audience is looking for, which kind of gets into that second point. And that's where I think tools like LinkedIn come in huge.
Yeah.
I am still amazed to this day about human society that I may have never met a person in my life, but because we both went to the same high school, and not even in the same years, but just we went to the same high school, or we even grew up in the same town, that they're willing to open the doors for warm introductions other than just that wink, that weak connection between the two. And that's where your homework kicks in, to be able to do your homework, figure out where they're from, figure out what they value, look at their social media history, really know your audience. Because if you go in cold, you're going to miss opportunities.
Joseph, real quick, before you keep going, I just want to drop some stats for everyone. So SalesLoft, who's a sales engagement platform. So they basically analyze millions and millions of emails, et cetera. This is going to be great for everyone. The top converting emails are emails that reference something in someone's hometown. That is the number one converting. And then like number 2 was that we went to the same high school or something like that. That's even because everyone's using the rehashing the college one, right? Because colleges are pumping out a lot of students, So that's just to validate what you're saying. So this is maybe a year and a half ago, SalesLoft put this out, but it's funny again, like you're, coming from it here and the data says the exact same thing.
Well, what's neat about that is you add in one more element to that, which is going back to the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
People love to hear their own name, and the power of a mail merge, if you will, quite literally, as you're sending out solicitations for meetings and introductions, to be able to know the use of people's names is still priceless. And I just don't understand why enough people don't realize it.
Well, yeah, I'm just typing it in here. Start with the story. You know how I learned it? I learned it from Zig Ziglar. I remember reading Zig Ziglar's got one of his first books is The Secret of the Close. Is that what it is? Secret of Closing Deals. Anyway, Zig Ziglar. Let me just Google it so I can. And maybe Kara, you can drop this in. It's Zig Ziglar, and I want to say it's Secrets of Closing the Sale. We'll drop a link to it. So he's got a book. And this is an old school book, right? Zig Ziglar's from like the 60s, 70s, and and he's got a story in there where he talks about selling homes. And what he would do is he'd say, but he'd keep directing him toward this cherry tree in the backyard. But you see that the memories that your kids are going to have there. You see that, and I feel like if I can be candid, and like I think this is important for everyone on LinkedIn, everyone on Zoom, guys. This is the part of sales that we're forgetting. I feel like the story and the craftsmanship is the part of sales that we are almost training out of sellers, because we're trying to make them all robots, and we are trying to make them all sound the same, do the same, etc. And we're arming them, and they need to understand the product, right? There's no doubt. You have to understand the product. But if you don't understand, like you said, the impact, what's the next layer? What's the next layer? Oh, so it's actually you solve this 4th layer thing. I just feel like if you don't have the story down, stop everything. Everything, go back. And what is your story? What's the outcome? How are you going to tell that story? That's a big part of it. So I'd love to hear kind of your next text. So we've got the story. Then what?
Yep.
So you've got this story. You can put the person in it. You're kind of visual. And that's a big technique there. You got to put them in the story. It's why the car dealer tries to get you to test drive it.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? The car dealer, they put you in that driver's seat, you're walking out of there. So.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess where that blends into that third piece that I was talking about, which is the passion, which is, and not everybody has the luxury, especially in this economy today, to be in a spot where they are doing something that they wholeheartedly believe in and have that passion, which is why I love the side hustle. Where you're not only doing this by day that pays the bills, you're learning your trade, you're learning your craft, but on the side, you're hopefully doing something that does charge your batteries. But when you speak to that idea, though, of the elements of the pitch and what helps I can't stress enough that homework. Mark Groenevetter wrote this piece also in the early 1970s called The Strength of Weak Ties, because the more angles you can get into your target audience, especially if it's a big deal, you're trying to sell something huge, it's not just a consumer facing app, you really need to have all those other points of light showing either recommendations based on the product from other people, recommendations of you as an individual from other people, which is why karma is also, we haven't talked about karma yet, but karma is real. It kind of goes back to that BS meter.
Right.
It really is the idea of being passionate about it. And I've seen some masterful salespeople that are really passionate about some things that maybe we would consider to be mundane or commodities,
right?
But they can still sell it.
Well, the key thing, for me, I get passionate about helping people cut through the noise and help themselves, which is why I'm passionate about sales. So I can get excited. I mean, I am one of those people. If you're like, Jake, guess what? Now you got to sell, tier 4 pens. I'm like, fantastic. Let's do it. Like, let's just get it. Cause I think, look, when I grew up, I had to, I sold MCI WorldCom, right? So if you guys don't know how to call someone and get them to put long distance on their cell phone, like that's how I had to sell vacation packages to Tunica, Mississippi. So I learned very early in my sales career how to get excited and really find a lot more, more interest in like, can I help this person or not? And then being okay if I can't, because I really believe that like a $39 3-day 2-night trip to Tunica, Mississippi, and then you know what, if you act now, Roger, I got $25 to Harrah's Casino for you. I thought that was a good deal. Yeah. Now granted, maybe you had to sit through a timeshare pitch, maybe, but like, I still thought it was a good deal. I'm like, dude, $39 for vacation. Well,
think of that pen that you're selling. You could actually go back and reconnect with people with a thoughtful handwritten letter and put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, send it to a relative. Oh yeah, no. There's all kinds of ways to show that passion.
I don't know. So I think that's it. So there's something here about passion, and it's and I think maybe if I could just maybe add a second point, I think it's also a passion plus belief in the outcome that your product can drive. That if you don't believe the outcomes that the story talks about, or if you don't believe the impact that you can have, that's me. It's the passion plus belief that if you, because you can hear the belief, when you talk to people, you can hear people get excited. And sometimes people confuse excitement and charisma with passion. And I think passion is maybe, that excitement and charisma. I've never really phrased it this way, but I don't know, maybe this makes sense. It's like passion is that plus like you hear belief in their voice.
Well, and what you also hear, and it's, we were going to go here one way or the other. We just want to jump to it.
Go for it.
Is they need to know, the audience, that you will, because you're passionate, because you believe in the outcome of whatever it is you're selling, you're going to be persistent. And what I mean by persistent is you'll take a no the first time. You might even take a no the second time. But when people believe that, oh my gosh, he truly does believe this and he truly will not stop. And so in some ways, I've been teased by basically just wearing people down over time with ideas. And they're like, if nothing else, I just signed on because it was easier to go, to write the check or to be a part of what you're doing, because I know that you're going to email again, you're going to call again.
That's right.
And you don't want to be spammy, of course, and I'm guilty of that. And I'm sure that there's been times when people have done that in a way they don't feel proud about. But you have to be ready for the no. And it's those people that take the no personally that quit too early. And they've got to get up, dust themselves off. I mean, I'm a father of 3 grown daughters. I've heard, Dad, you're terrible. Dad, you suck, so many times, but it made it easier for me doing a pitch or doing a presentation.
I've got a 2-year-old, Joseph, and that's like my terror. I got a 2-year-old girl, and I'm just like, she
loves you right now. That's great.
Most of the time, man. She's got a lot of personality for 2. But no, sorry.
But just to finalize that point there in your grief of knowing that one day your kid might say something mean to you, is you will be told things that are mean. But there's really two elements inside that. And this is what I learned selling candy bars at my little league, you know, almost 40 years ago, whatever it is that either A, you can just brush it off because sometimes you're just going to meet a jerk.
That's right.
But B, you need to really step back and ask, what is it about either me or the product or the service that I can improve on to get to that yes? I mean, one of my favorite examples are investors who said no to me in the beginning, but then later on came around and said yes, because they saw me improving. They saw me make the product better. They saw me take their ideas and build on it. And that's just a sign of not only growth, but having the self-confidence to be told no and learn from it instead of just, you know, oh, well, those people suck. They're stupid. They don't see the genius.
That's it. I mean, look, when I tell, you know, when I work with Junior, when I was a frontline sales leader, you know, working with directors who are managing teams and managing managers, the most important mindset that anyone can have is everything is your fault. And if you're just like, look, the pitch sucked, they said no. If you're like, well, maybe it did suck. You know, and you take that, you can detach the emotion from the outcome. And that's part of, you know, I grew up, I really liked science when I was a kid. I was like, you know, in IB chemistry and this stuff. And, you know, that's that science mind. It's like, I'm just experimenting. It's like, and an outcome is an outcome. And if you can learn to detach and realize that, look, I'm testing something, this outcome happened, and I'm detached from that, but it's my fault. Almost every deal I look back at is like the reason it didn't close is my fault. I didn't ask the tough questions up front to understand if they were qualified or not. I ran through it. I made a bunch of assumptions. I thought they were all hot and heavy and bought in. Yep. Every deal that doesn't close ever has always, it's my fault. And I can almost always go back and pinpoint it to something I did.
Yeah.
You know, I got half years.
I refer to that as the sunshine and butterflies moment. And what I mean by that is, so where I'm pivoting now, kind of my fifth career, if you will, is more in leader development, working with individuals from the C-suite to the front lines, helping build teams, especially now as we're adapting to the future of work. And so what I like to refer to is sunshine and butterflies, which is, okay, all right, we've done this. We've completed a project. It didn't go well. Yeah. Let's bring everybody in to figure out what it was. So you start with sunshine and butterflies and say, okay, Jake, you're a great person. You're wonderful. We're not talking bad about you. Your baby's not ugly, but let's talk about what happened and let's break it down. You know, in the military, we call that an after action review to distance yourself, no thin skins, we say, and let's just break through what we wanted to do, what happened, and then try to build that bridge to gap the two. So
I think that's a good one. But, you know, what I feel like is companies move too fast. They skip reflection. You know, there's actually a lot of study that talks about the reflection to like memory creation and change is one of the most important elements. But so many companies, they move so fast that they don't take the time. And look, I'm sure I get in that mode. I'm sure you get in that mode sometimes. But, you know, you always have to, whether it's a Saturday or Sunday, it's later in the afternoon or something, you have to reflect. You know, you're not going to grow. And so we've got a bunch of questions coming in. So let me
just nail it with that.
Yeah, please do.
The acronym is REST: read, exercise, sleep, and think. I learned it from an old boss of mine, George Casey. And it's that think piece, which you can define it in different ways, but it's your reflection piece. It's stepping away from the chaos of the every moment. And if you don't read, exercise, sleep, and think routinely, you're going to burn yourself out. And I've watched far more talented entrepreneurs than me, far more talented soldiers and leaders than me burn out and not be able to achieve whatever their goal was because they didn't rest when they needed to. But anyway, you said questions.
That's solid. I mean, that's a really actionable one, I think, for people too, that, you know, if you're not doing any of these four things, which I think a lot of people, right, you know, they look at this, they're like, I'm mediocre at some of this, not so, you know, not so good at some of the rest. It's tough. It's tough to maintain that. And I find for me, if I'm out of balance, right, or something's happening, this is where I go back to. Yep. You know, this is what I go back to. So Megan Pulliam, she's got a question here. During the pitch, how do you prioritize promoting your product, speaking to a prospect's pain versus positioning against competitors? So this is a really, really good one here, Megan. Again, everyone, if you're on the Zoom, drop your questions. If you're on LinkedIn, we're going to start hopping into some Q&A now. So this is a good one. So
so I am of that school belief that you never throw shade on anybody. I mean, if you have a better product or better service, highlight those qualities, stay on the positive. Again, this goes back to karma. If you're throwing shade and talking shit, I guarantee you there's something in your closet or your product that's not necessarily 100% or can be improved. That's my quick and easy answer. Jake, what do you say to that?
Yeah, for me, it's all, I don't know where I learned this, but it was around this time too, again, like, I think it's like when I was becoming like a professional seller, you know, the mantra I had is I'd always convince someone that, hey, you made one good decision, now make another, you know, and hey, great, you're using XYZ. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Right. So let's go back to the problems that you're having, you know, and, you know, the framework that we teach with ours is, you know, look, I think that a lot of people, what they struggle with the competition is they don't even know what the competition does. They listen to their boss and their boss's boss and their CEO talk about how they suck and we're so much better. And they don't actually go in and educate people. Look, here's what here's what our competitors do.
Yeah.
And you can, again, take an idea back to, you know, you can have that concept where, again, you're detaching emotionally from a lot of this. And it's just really about, you know, how can you try to position what's important in a way that leans your way. So the framework we use, and it's a riff off of Challengers, you start with 3 industry trends that are macro. You say, look, so what we're seeing in the industry is this, this, and this. How are you thinking about that, Louise? Yep, that's amazing. And then you're kind of teeing up a big industry trend. But what most aren't thinking about is the importance of mobile in that experience. And then according to Forrester, mobile is going to be 45% of XYZ. How are you thinking about that? Oh, shit, Jake, you know, this is important. Well, look, so in order to compete in this new world, you got to be mobile first. You got to do this. You got to do this. That's what we do at XYZ. And guess what? I'm pulling up those stats because our competitor doesn't have mobile, right? Like, and if we instead, it was about customer experience, I'd go find third-party stats to talk about the importance of customer experience. Yeah. And try to see if I got to pivot their mind to think about the trends in the industry that lean our way. And if they think that those trends are important, then they should go, you know, they'll go this way. If not, they'll disagree. They'll say, yeah, mobile's not that important to us. Okay, well, great. Then maybe, you know, because if you don't believe that, that's our core differentiator. Yep. So if you don't believe my thesis here that this is a trend that's important, then there's no point in even demoing or pitching.
Yeah, you know, it was interesting. Back to Megan's point, first of all, you need to be, if not an expert, you need to be really good and experienced on your competitors. Use them. I mean, like when I was building a mobile app company, I had my competitors' apps on my phone. I would be in a city. I'd use my app. Scared. Yeah, I'd use their app. I'd kind of get to know what works and what didn't. But then just on that note, though, about competitors, I found it interesting during my run for Congress that I was getting lit on fire by the far extremes of both parties, meaning that I was positioning the product, if you will, to be a little more mainstream. Yeah. You know, sometimes it doesn't matter what you do or say, your competitors or their fans are going to be coming at you throwing shade. Just try not to throw it back.
That's right. That's always it. I've taken that. I'm very, very similar. Hey, look, you made one great, look, that's what you believe. They're fantastic. Right now, let's go talk about this other thing and see if I can see if this is important to you. Because if it's not important to you, then, you know, you're not going to partner with me. So, all right, we've got some more coming in here. How about pitching on LinkedIn? So somebody asked this. Let me see who it is. I can't find their name right now. Somebody asked about pitching on LinkedIn. You know, how do you think about reaching out to individuals, engaging on LinkedIn with some type of pitch?
Yeah. So first of all, I recognize that only about 2% of people on LinkedIn or even using LinkedIn correctly. I'm still not correctly using it to its full potential. I'm still blown away at how much capacity is on LinkedIn that people just don't use. And I'm guilty of it. I mean, I've been on LinkedIn since 2005, I think. Kelly Purdue, a mentor, he was like the winner of the second season of The Apprentice, ironically. Okay. And he got me into LinkedIn. Well, all I ever did was just put my job titles on there for 15 years until this last year when I realized, holy crap, Facebook is where people go to put on kittens. Twitter is where they go to complain about politics, but LinkedIn is where people go for business. And I'm just figuring that out. But I still believe there's some universal truths to LinkedIn's pitching, which is get those warm introductions first. If you're coming in cold, you're almost always going to get a delete, and tailor it. My name, and I love how some people use different names or all caps so that they're being able to fight the different ways people are tooling that. But I think all the principles offline apply similarly on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jake, what do you got? What do you add to that?
Well, keep going on that. I think that's right. You know, what would you do at a networking event? Would you go in and walk up to Josh, Joseph? I was trying to say if it was Joe or Joseph.
No, it's fine. I'll answer it any of it, but keep going.
Josh, Joseph.
Yeah. So
you can call me Jacob, whatever you want to call me. But that's it, right? Whenever you first make contact with someone, you don't immediately rush in. You try to see if there's, maybe you notice their hat, their shirt, there's, something that you can make commentary on. Maybe it's a topic that you just heard at a speech, someone gave a speech on. And then once you establish, a few little rapport, then you might ask something. So I feel like that's what I call it the slow play, which is just like your relationship or anything else. You're always going to have a better outcome if you can wait and add a little bit of value, be a little patient, and then, go in for the hard ask.
Yep. And I think it applies in similar ways on LinkedIn, no different. Yeah. And you have the added advantage of all the other background and information to be able to explore that network and find the degrees of connection. It's a fascinating tool.
That's it, man. Yeah. And even what a lot of people don't realize is they see that someone doesn't post. Well, you'd be very surprised that just click on activity and you'll see, wow, this person's actually liking a post or two every week or commenting. And then that's going to tell me a little bit more about that person too. So again, when I reach out, if I see a theme of, maybe that person's not posting, but I see a theme of the things they're interacting with, maybe that's what I'm going to use for my DM. Hey, John, I noticed this. I also am a big fan of these two folks and thought there might be something here.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why it's important. I use Contactually. That's my favorite CRM tool over the years. And I was doing this in high school. In fact, on an IBM PC Junior with no hard drive, I coded in BASIC a CRM tool, basically. First name, last name, phone number, home address of all my friends in 7th and 8th grade. So that's pretty gangster, man.
Like, for those of you who don't know, how you judge a person's code worth is if they know BASIC. And if you don't know how to code in BASIC, to old school, to coders, if you're just doing Ruby, you're like, this is the original OG stuff.
Yeah. So that's how much I believe in CRM tools and the idea of circling back and a light touch every now and then. Again, to your point, it's the slow play, but it gets and delivers results when you show an interest in what they're doing. And because all those tools can be connected together, either literally with things like Zapier or just your own discipline to circle back. And Contactually also has a plugin that allows me to see their social media feed. And that's cool. What made me think of it is to go look and see what they care about. Because if you start with them, and that's the first question you asked me at the beginning of this, it's knowing your audience and putting it into a story for them.
Yeah. All right. So Rez has got a follow-up here. I like this one. And I've got, again, guys, thank you everyone for dropping the comments in here. Again, make sure I think they've got the can you do reactions on a webinar? Can you guys give, Joseph a
I think they have like little clappy hands and thumbs up and all that.
Maybe I can't do it right now because I'm presenting, but if you like it, let's see, Jen Ferguson raised her hand. Maybe you can do that. I don't know what you can or can't do on Zoom, but if you're on LinkedIn, make sure to toss a like or, there you go. People can raise their hand. I think that's the Zoom version of this. So again, toss a like out there or hand clap if you like what Joseph's laying down. So we got a question from LinkedIn here. Are there 1 to 2 key questions you'd ask in an interview to try to ascertain when recruiting a new grad or experienced rep, whether or not they'll be able to find success in an inside sales role? I know there's no perfect question. However, would love to hear your take. So how do you think about applying some of this in that process? How do you think about the interview process?
The first thing I did, and let's go beyond when it was just employee number 1 or number 2, because those are soulmates. I mean, they're not even employees. Those are true believers in a small company.
Yeah.
So I think the question is gauged more towards a larger company. What I always did was let that division do the selection and the interviewing, and I was only there at the end as more just to make sure that I've met every person coming into the new organization. And so in terms of the questions to ask, there is no perfect question, by the way, but what I always love to do or try to remember to do is to ask them where they want to be in 5 years.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's always, always, always about building the team and trying to figure out what it is they want to do, where it is that they're building towards. Because if they keep one eye on the future, their own future, I think it makes them more willing to be a part of the current team when they know that we have their back. So that would be my question, which is, what do you want to be in 5 years or working on down the road?
Yeah, have they even thought about it, right? Have they put enough, kind of thought into their own path? And yeah, for me, I think, you can get them to describe, certain scenarios. Again, like you talked about storytelling, which I think is an important piece here. You can hear in their interview question, I'm trying to think like, what is like a good one that I would probably ask here? So we're a very regimented interview process. So that's like what we're up to is like it's very, very regimented. And so one of the questions we ask is, so when I talk to your boss, what's their name? And we make them spell the name. How are they going to rate you on a scale of 1 to 10 and why? Right? John Smith. How do you spell Smith? S-M-I-T-H. Okay, super. Great. And then then you ask more like, okay, tell me more about your working relationship with John Smith. And, how would you so I think if you can maybe get them to start to demonstrate and you'll start to see that, that pattern, then maybe you learn a little bit more about how they tell it. That's been successful for me. But we also, when it comes to interviewing for salespeople, we use we try to like really hone in on very specific questions because we know we're looking for people, again, like if you think about it, the way that somebody leaves their last 2 or 3 roles is probably how they're going to leave you. Yep. And so as you get to know, and if they've got one bad boss, we all have that, right? But right. If every boss is this story, and every boss experience starts with, then I'm like, nope, there's a 0% chance you're an A player. If every boss you've had, and you've had 3 it's all their fault, you're the problem. Yep. Right? And, either poor decision-making or, you actually are a problem here. All right. So next question. So Jen Ferguson, what's up, Jen? Jen's going to be a guest on one of our sessions coming up here. Is there a reason why scripts are bad? You lose authenticity. So we talked a little bit about it, but, what would you say to the people that, scripts are bad? We've talked a little bit about it, but anything else to add there?
Well, I'm just glad that we brought it up so we can try to separate one more time what I was implying by saying that scripts were bad in the beginning, which is if you don't know your material, if you don't know the ins and outs of what you're talking about, the script early on provides you that outline, that framework. But by the time you're going live, often talking to real people and real customers, you should have it so internalized that it is a disciplined conversation that goes down a certain sequence, because there is a science to it. I mean, there is a way, as you said in that example you gave earlier in this conversation. So I'm not saying they're bad. All I'm saying is they can't be a substitute for knowing your material inside and out and believing in your product.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it goes back to prep for a lot of this.
Yep.
So Sean Mulcairn, Sean, what's up, man? Has a question. Advice for doing a mock pitch during an interview. So to kind of dovetail back to that, I want to get them engaged, but a bit harder given the audience is pretending to be the prospect. What are your thoughts on doing a mock pitch?
Sean, I can't stand doing the rehearsals, but they are so important. They are so important. Whether you're videotaping yourself, whether you're doing it with a mirror, whether you're doing it with a friend, they drive me crazy, but they are so effective in terms of getting you to see things you're not seeing and to have an outsider, third party, especially when they don't know the product. It's the example of explain it to a 7-year-old. Rehearsals, mock pitches, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Very important, very helpful. In fact, they're so helpful on my website, josephkopser.com. That's one of the things I have as an offering when people book services with me is to let me help them with their pitch. Because if you don't get the pitch down, and I'm a friendly audience because I'll wire brush you to kind of help you work on what you're talking about. But if you go in to do it for the first time in front of a real customer, that's the last time to be doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. I got some advice, and I go back and it's those dumb little things in life and that make an impact. So when I was going to interview for my first job out of college, which was with the Tampa, which was in Major League Baseball with an MLB team, I had someone, and I don't know if it was a teacher or somebody. They said, you know what you should do to bring to that interview is you bring your game plan of what you're going to do when you get the job. And so I took the time, and here I'm, idiot, college senior thinking I know everything. I remember the interview, I did tell them that, like, you asked what's my 5-year? I'm like, I want to be the GM. They're like, you're interviewing for a group sales job. You're in like the wrong world. But anyway, so imagine I showed up to that interview, first interview out of college, and why I'm trying to tie all this together. I've dropped down how I'm going to sell Tampa Bay Devil Ray tickets. And here's my strategy. Hey, I know that there's a big population in St. Pete, and here's what I'm going to do there. I know that there's here. I brought that plan, right? Next interview, right? I went to a group interview with the Phoenix Coyotes, 35 people in a group interview. I was the only person that got a job. Guess what I brought? How to sell hockey in the Arizona Sun. Brought my business plan. Go to Career Builder. Interviewing for my first sales leadership job. What did I do? Brought my whole territory plan of how I was going to revamp the entire territory and what I was going to do with it. And all of this is prep. All of this is, in an interview process, you better learn the pitch. I thought about, I bet it's kind of tough to sell hockey in Phoenix because it's hot and probably it's not as bad. I looked up, how many local hockey clubs there were in Phoenix.
Yep. I looked up how many parking spots there were in Baltimore.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I feel like, a lot of this with an interview, if you are not in line, if you're not prepping for your interview and you're not expecting to pitch, you're probably not quality. You don't want the job that bad, and so that's my take on it is like, if they're that, I don't know, clueless, then not a big fan. So we got time for a couple more questions here. All right. All right. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it. Stephen said that we're amazing. All right. So let's see here. Let me find the next one. Oh, here we go. So this is a question from Charles Thompson. What's up, Charles? Jake, I'm in enterprise sales. What are some essential tips? So, question for you, Joseph, when you're in bigger deals, how does some of this change? And I think actually the one thing I might want you to elaborate on, you started to talk about this and I skipped over it. You talked about these weak ties. You talked about these individuals. So for someone like Charles, can you elaborate more on that weak ties? Because I think that's what's super applicable, at least to me in big deals.
Yeah. So some people refer to this as Metcalfe's law, which is that the strength of an ecosystem is exponentially more valuable when you increase the number of nodes. So in that particular example, Charles, if I think I understand your question, the more touch points that you have around the decision maker, because that's what you want to get to. Who's making the decision for the purchase? And it may not even be the person whose name is on the line that is dotted. It might actually be his or her boss. It might be somewhere else in the ecosystem. The more that you can do your homework on the inside of that ecosystem, which is why the weak ties come in. So you may have had a friend who used to work in that company. You call them up and ask her, can you just kind of lay out how the company works? What's the internal politics? Who are the real decision makers on really big deals? That is how I would approach it. Not necessarily going directly to that one person, but instead having kind of a wave of other ways to gather information to know how you need to pitch it in the right way.
Yeah. And that also lets you know, where you're at in a deal. If you can get meetings with some of these other people, the other thing I'll add, which is kind of it's this just the similar theme is the kind of technique that we teach. I got to come up with I changed it. It's not divide and conquer anymore because I actually looked up the actual definition of divide and conquer. And divide and conquer doesn't mean that you divide. It means that you're trying to divide a population to get them to overthrow something. But it's not divide and conquer. But what I realized, and I was doing this intuitively when I got into enterprise sales, as I learned, and you were talking about this before and you're talking about it now too, each group or department has their own priorities.
Yep.
And I think all of you have been in that big enterprise meeting where you've got 7, 8, 9 people. You got marketing, operations, IT, etc. And so how you start that meeting becomes critical. And then you use a technique that we call, which is you basically divide out the audiences and then you talk to them each one-to-one about their goals. And therefore, when you come back to the pitch, so if you start the whole meeting, you say, look, Joseph, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I know you and I had a good, conversation 2 weeks ago. I know we've got marketing, operations, et cetera. The goal for this meeting is to kind of pull out some of those nuances that we talked about, give you all a high level on how we typically work, And then we're actually going to set up a series of, brief one-to-ones with each of you to go deep on any questions, technical concerns, etc. Does that work for everybody? And then all of a sudden, you've all been in those meetings when IT starts chirping up. Oh, well, can this integrate with blah, blah, blah? And you're like, shut up, Randy. Like, but now with that whole thing, I can say, Randy, that's exactly what we're going to talk about next week.
Yep.
Really great question, because I know I've been in there, and when I didn't do this, you've been in those big meetings where you see the room start to turn. You see people asking questions that aren't really applicable, but they're poking little mini holes in you. And you're like, oh, I got to stop this. So we found, if you can go and in that way, when you put your final proposal together, I can say, IT, this is how we help you. Marketing, not here's how I help your company. Here's what I do for operations. Here's what I do for marketing. Here's what I do for IT. That your likelihood of getting that deal done skyrockets.
And not only does your deal chances of being successful increase, but probably you personally and the product and service offering got that much better because you're discovering things that you never really thought of and how it might apply in another area.
And you're getting a 360 view of that person, et cetera. You're seeing how different people talk about you. You get to know that because one thing to understand in enterprise and every deal, the powerarchy is different than the hierarchy. And a lot of times we assume because there's layers that this person's in charge. And in reality, everyone seems to keep bringing up Helen, and Helen's over here. Like, okay, all right, this is it.
Well, it's a great example. It's if you don't know the person in the front office that controls the calendar, you don't know what's going on. And I can't even begin to say whether it's popularized through movies or people have experienced it in real life, but the way that you get into often the decision maker is not the decision maker, but it's the people that make him or her smart. And oh, by the way, you're being judged from the second you walk in and sit in that lobby, the way you're treating the receptionist, the way you're treating that team, because don't think for 1 second that you're going to be measured or judged later on when they're considering a deal. Because if one person says, you know what, she came in, she sat down, she was asking me for this, asking me for that, and she was doing this, she was doing that, not at all friendly, not somebody we want to be a part of. And yet you may have gone into that pitch and crushed it. That's right. And had everybody in the room thinking you were the next thing since sliced bread. But and again, that goes back to karma, which is what I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so last two questions here. Eris Manasco says, how do you like to acquire, implement customer feedback to tailor your pitch to future prospects?
Oh, constant. That goes back to the thick skins we were talking about earlier. I always wanted to be, especially early on in our company, Ride Scout, to want to see feedback of people when they were using it. It wasn't always pretty, but that's how we learned what wasn't working. And from that, we iterated. Of course, now when I ran for Congress, I didn't always want the feedback, especially if it was coming from the extremes. But when it was coming from those, as a moderate, when it was coming from those that I really valued and judged to be smart people that I wanted to learn from, yeah. I incorporated it. But Jake, you said this earlier though, but you might just find a situation where a person's asking for something that you're not providing or having and just say, well, we're not
that's a good right. fit. And that's okay. That, again, you don't have to react to every piece of customer feedback. The other thing I would say is that, if the customer is telling you the utility or the value they saw, that's a pretty dang good story to tell a prospect. And yep. So, make sure you pull out those customer stories. I think sometimes marketing and CS, they get so caught up in getting testimonials and case studies. Like, I just need 5 sentences. I just need to know these 5 things and how it did it. So that's what I would say is use it for feedback.
And I've got those plastered all over my website too. If you go to josephkopser.com, halfway down, there it is. People that have worked with me. And just like you say, 2 sentences, 3 sentences.
Kopser.com. Let's make sure we get that. Kara, let's make sure we share that link in there so everyone goes checks it out too. All right, last question. Jody Mixon. Do you know Jody?
I do know Jody. She's awesome.
All right, great. So shout out to Jody here. How do you exit graciously from a pitch meeting that did not stick? So let's say that you're in the middle of a pitch. We've all been there.
Been there, done that, but go on.
Yeah. How do you handle those scenarios? How do you handle this isn't going very well?
Yeah. So I was on like the 50th or 60th floor of the Transamerica building in San Francisco, meeting one-on-one with a potential partner investor. We weren't really quite sure how it was going to go down. And it was so bad in the first 2 or 3 minutes that I could literally see the frost forming on the inside of the conference room. And, at the end of it, Craig and I just went and we had an early lunch and had an early beer and just chucked it up to the fact that, even my own father and mother, who love me very much, don't like me all the time. And so you really just cannot take it personally. As far as how you exit, I did have one pitch where I got a little bit, I wouldn't say uppity, but I was a little bit offended because basically the guy told me I was an idiot and didn't know anything about the future of transportation. He said there are bus people, there are car people, and never the twain shall meet, because our app was multimodal.
Right.
And sure enough, his company, sadly, in the taxi industry, didn't live much longer after that because it was overwhelmed by Uber and Lyft. And in that case, I literally just did a very polite, I just closed my laptop, looked at my colleagues, Craig and Steve, that were with me, and I said, well, I guess we've done all we can here, and I'll see you all later. It lasted 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's it. That goes back to what we were talking about with the pitch. If they don't believe the thesis, demoing the product doesn't matter. And I think that it's identical. If they don't believe the trends that are happening in your industry, they're not going to do it. For me, I'm a pretty direct confrontation person. So for me, I read the room fairly well. And so I got no problem. I mean, this would be my advice, Jody, is I would call it out. I'd say, hey, it seems like you're not 100% sold on this piece. And I get that. Can you tell me a little bit more? Sometimes it's people are nervous to tell you what it is. And so I try to invite room. It's the same thing when you end a call and you hear someone on you tell them the price and they go, yeah, okay. Oh, okay. I call that out immediately too. I said, look, Joseph, I hear a little hesitation in your voice. So just tell me what's going on. So I try to make room for them to get out whatever it is. And then to your point, if they don't agree with the trend, I'm like, hey, I just think we have a disconnect in thesis. There's this guy, he blocked me on LinkedIn. I can't remember his name. He works for this company called Replays, and he's CEO. And we had a call, and we were talking. I said, look, I just don't agree with and he was kind of pitching me, and it was the reverse. I said, I just don't agree with your thesis. I don't think that you should be coaching sales reps after one call. I think you need to get a picture so it's a fluke, and they're not going to do it. I was like, I philosophically believe this, and I think that it's the right way to coach people. And so he got very offended. And I'm like, and it's the same kind of the other side. So I think had he made room and then just realized like, well, this is a belief, this is a value, and I'm not going to overwhelm this person. So I try to make room for him when I'm on the other side, and I find that works really well.
Yeah. One thing we didn't go into, and it's too bad we're already at the end of this hour, we got more material to go into, but
of course,
reading the room. I cannot tell you whether it was in the military, in business, or in any other nonprofit, when a speaker gets up and is not reading the room and realizing how badly either they've gone off the message or off the track of the focus of the group, or they're just bombing in general and they just keep plotting through. Oh, that's miserable to watch. And I do everything I can to help prevent that from happening.
Those are the ones where, look, and here's the thing, it can be easy, but that goes back to, you have to be okay to confront things. You have to say, hey guys, look, I want to make this valuable. What are 2 things? And now I've got different ways to avoid that from ever happening, because I've done it. Yeah. I've put in my 10,000 hours, right? But you got to be willing to adjust on the fly. And that's why it goes back to prep. I prepare that every meeting, every sales meeting I'm going to have is going to be the most difficult sales meeting I've ever had in my life. That's why I never get caught off guard. If you go into every meeting expecting to get your gut punched, you never get caught off guard. And I feel like that sales reps, instead, they do the opposite. They go into it's going to be sunshine and roses, as opposed to because you got to be present. I'm reading, you're reading the room. I'm reading this. And because if you're in sunshine and roses mode, you're not present. We're just rolling. You're not thinking about it. So look, man, I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. We going to grab a beer or something, or?
I hope so.
I'm down for that for sure. I'm trying to get back into golf too, so we could go.
Well, I live near Circle C, so there's plenty of social distancing out there at that golf course. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I went out and played Lions last week. It was fun.
Nice.
Just putting around. So, all right, everyone. Well, thank you again, Joseph. I appreciate it, man. I'm glad we got a chance to meet, and definitely look forward to connecting live here in the next few weeks.
I look forward to it as well. Take care, Jake. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.